The thought is suddenly gone. You walk into the kitchen and freeze, completely forgetting why you are there. You shake your head and blame it on getting older. The standard story is that after 60, the hardware simply wears out. The brain shrinks. Memory fades. We accept this as a biological law, but we shouldn't. Your brain is not just an old battery losing its charge over the years. It is a living network that is constantly rebuilding its own architecture. Always. Synapses physically disconnect and rewire again and again. Cell membranes are continuously dismantled and rebuilt. This is not a question of age. The blueprint for this continuous remodeling does not come from crossword puzzles. It comes from the exact nutrients your gut extracts. As food breaks down, specific molecules pass through your intestinal wall, enter your bloodstream, and travel straight up into your skull. They cross the blood-brain barrier and physically build the tissue that forms your memory centers. Your brain constructs itself out of the precise elements you consume. If you provide the right raw materials, those cells stay fluid, communicate fast, and clear out damage. If you don't, the cell membranes lose their flexibility. The electrical signals slow down, and that is exactly why it becomes hard to recall a name or why you just walked into a room. These are the 7 daily foods that crucially help steer this active biological reconstruction. Let's start with the absolute foundation. Think of a memory as a spark. To recall a name or a face, an electrical pulse fires down a nerve cell. But electricity alone cannot jump the physical gap between 2 neurons. It needs a chemical bridge. That bridge is built from a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. When levels are low, the signal drops. The thought simply vanishes. Your body does not manifest this neurotransmitter out of thin air. It needs a specific raw material called choline, and one of the most concentrated sources of this material sits right on your breakfast table: the egg yolk. For decades, we threw the yolk away because we were worried about cholesterol. That was a biological mistake. When you eat an egg, the choline is absorbed, transported across the blood-brain barrier, and physically converted into acetylcholine. You are literally consuming the base material required for memory and attention. But it does a second job. The brain also turns choline into phospholipids. These are the structural fats that repair the actual outer walls of your brain cells. Eating an egg does not instantly repair a failing memory, but depriving your brain of choline forces it to communicate with fewer chemical messengers and weaken cell walls. Building this signal is only the first step. Once that neuron fires, it demands a massive surge of resources, and that leads to a completely different problem deep inside your brain's microvessels. Your brain makes up only 2% of your body weight, but it demands 20% of your oxygen. To deliver this, you rely on a massive microscopic network of capillary vessels. Over the decades, these tiny vessels face constant oxidative stress. They lose their flexibility. The blood flow is restricted. When neurons fire, they simply cannot pull oxygen from the blood fast enough to supply the brain. The network slows down. This is exactly where the compounds in blueberries become crucial. Blueberries contain deep, dark pigments called anthocyanins. Once digested, these specific plant compounds do something unusual. They cross the blood-brain barrier, reach the tissue of the hippocampus, and accumulate exactly there, in the area responsible for learning and memory. Inside this memory center, they act directly on the inner lining of your microvessels. Imagine these tiny pipelines being constantly irritated and stiffened by metabolic waste. The anthocyanins essentially calm that irritation. They help the blood vessels relax and widen, while clearing out the oxidative particles that cause the stiffness. They do not just boost your memory in some vague way. They physically repair the supply lines. They ensure that the exact moment a nerve cell fires, a surge of oxygen and fuel can instantly flow in to support the thought. But keeping the supply lines open is only one step. The blood flowing through those pipelines must also carry the right nutritional package. Let's look at a very specific thread inside your brain's capillary network. As your cells metabolize energy, they produce a byproduct called homocysteine. In high amounts, it acts like microscopic sandpaper, scraping the delicate inner walls of your microvessels. Once a vessel is structurally damaged, calcium from your bloodstream naturally deposits into the microtears. The vessel calcifies, it becomes entirely inflexible, and oxygen flow drops. People notice their memory slowing down and try to fix it by swallowing a highly concentrated synthetic vitamin pill. It rarely works. Stopping this chain reaction requires more than just one isolated chemical. It requires several nutrients working at the exact same time. This is the real biological purpose of eating dark leafy greens like raw spinach or kale. The plant's natural folate drives a metabolic engine that physically dismantles the homocysteine before it can scrape the vessel walls. Because the tissue remains smooth and undamaged, the vitamin K from the leaves can easily intercept circulating calcium and keep it strictly out of your brain's vascular network. And while those pipelines are kept open and flexible, a plant pigment called lutein crosses directly into the nerve tissue itself. There it acts as a final physical shield against aggressive oxygen particles that would otherwise tear holes in the very tissue of your memory centers. It operates as one fluid physical process. A single isolated pill cannot replicate this. But defending the blood vessels is not enough. The physical structure of the brain itself requires a very specific type of fat to maintain its architecture. You often hear that walnuts are good for your memory simply because they look like miniature brains. We can ignore that surface comparison. The real biological mechanism is entirely about building material, specifically fat. Your brain is roughly 60% fat. Every single nerve cell is wrapped in a fatty outer boundary called a membrane. This boundary is not just a protective shell, it is the active surface where electrical signals are generated and received. If your diet runs on highly processed, low-quality industrial fats, your body is forced to use those exact materials to repair the cell membranes. The tissue becomes thick and resistant to electrical pulses. The signal struggles to jump from one cell to the next. Walnuts deliver a completely different structural material. They contain a specific unsaturated fat called alpha-linolenic acid. When digested, this fat travels to the brain and is physically woven into the outer walls of your neurons. It keeps the cell boundary highly fluid and electrically conductive, allowing thoughts and reactions to fire at full speed. At the same time, walnuts carry polyphenols. These act as a local preservative inside the brain, stopping those delicate new fats from breaking down under daily wear and tear. You are actively building a faster, more responsive physical network, but building a highly conductive network in your head is useless if the chemical signals reaching your brain are corrupted from the outside. And the most dominant signals dictating your brain's daily performance do not even originate in your skull. They start down in your gut. Your brain does not work in an isolated bubble. It is constantly receiving chemical status reports from your digestive tract. We call this the gut-brain axis. When you eat fermented foods like plain yogurt or kefir, you introduce live bacteria into the microbiome of your gut. While these bacteria do not travel up into your head, they act as a local manufacturing plant down in your gut. They ferment the indigestible plant fibers from your food that your stomach cannot process. As they break these fibers apart, they produce specific fatty acids, like butyrate. These exact acids enter your bloodstream and interact with the vagus nerve. This is the thick nerve cable connecting your gut directly to the base of your brain. If your gut is irritated, it sends constant alarm signals up this cable to the brain, which can create physical inflammation inside your head and block your ability to recall information. By introducing the right bacteria through your diet, you shift this signal. Kefir causes your gut to send calming, anti-inflammatory signals upward to the brain. This physically reduces the inflammatory stress directly around your nerve cells in the brain. But clearing out inflammation is only one part of the job. The nerve cells themselves still need to be physically rebuilt, and that requires the most critical structural fat of all. Let's look at how a thought actually travels. It moves as an electrical signal along a nerve cell, but for that signal to move fast, the nerve cell must be wrapped in a highly flexible outer layer. If your body builds this layer out of low-quality fats from processed foods, the cell boundary becomes thick and inflexible. The electrical signal physically slows down. This is when your thinking feels sluggish. Your body cannot manufacture the specific, rapid-conducting fat it needs to fix this problem. You have to eat it. This is the exact biological role of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically from fatty fish like salmon or sardines. These fish provide a highly concentrated type of omega-3 called DHA. When you digest a piece of salmon, this DHA travels through your blood, enters your brain, and is physically built directly into the outer walls of your neurons. You are literally swapping out old, inflexible material for fresh, rapid-conducting omega-3 fat. This is the most visible physical form of neuroplasticity. You are not just giving your brain energy, you are actively exchanging the physical hardware. But replacing your nerve cell walls periodically with fish is not the end of the story. You have to protect that newly built tissue and the entire vascular network every single day. And that brings us to the final daily habit. Extra virgin olive oil is not a quick brain upgrade you take by the spoonful. It is the long-term physical baseline for your entire vascular system. By now, you understand that your brain relies on a massive network of capillary vessels to deliver oxygen and fragile cell walls to send electrical signals. If those vessels are constantly exposed to low-grade inflammation, they swell, the pathways narrow, and the blood flow is severely restricted. This is exactly where extra virgin olive oil actively intervenes. It contains a specific plant compound called oleocanthal. Once in your bloodstream, this compound acts almost exactly like a targeted anti-inflammatory drug. It physically blocks the exact enzymes that cause the microvessels in your brain to swell and inflame. Using this olive oil daily ensures that the structural repairs you make with omega-3 fats and the vessel clearing you trigger with blueberries are not immediately destroyed by new inflammation. It locks the active reconstruction of your brain into a protected state. And that brings us back to the moment when a thought suddenly vanishes. When a thought suddenly vanishes mid-sentence, your brain is not slowly shutting down. The electrical signal is simply crashing into inflexible cell walls and restricted blood vessels. Memory decay is not necessarily a consequence of aging, it is a failure of supply. Since your brain constantly dismantles and rebuilds its own tissue, this mechanism runs in both directions, breaking down but also building up. But the moment you change the physical building blocks entering your blood, the architecture of your memory changes with them.